Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom.
Welcome to Emotional Algebra. We've got another week where Andrew's on vacation, enjoying some family time. And today we're bringing in a guest we've had before that you are all familiar with. He's been an MLB commentator and played in the Major League Baseball, was a two-sport athlete at University of Nevada, Reno. And happy to have him back. We're going to talk about pennant races. So here we're going to add your singy, my singy, our singy, Chris singy. Singleton is in the studio. Thanks.
What's
for coming
happening?
back, Chris.
It's that time of the year, man, for baseball players and baseball fans. It can be exciting for the fans, especially their team's got a shot, with these different playoff spots, as it's been expanded over the years. More fan bases actually, can be excited longer, which I think is good overall. For players, this is a great opportunity for them as well, because when you're part of a winning team and you perhaps get the opportunity to go into the postseason, some stars can get born in October, as we've seen over the years with players having that were not household name players per se, but got into the postseason and got hot, and all of a sudden had an erasable run that now kind of puts them on the map, and then also positions them for better contract opportunities going forward. So for the most part, I think it's a pretty exciting time. I think it's also a time where your casual fan starts to lean in a little bit more and pay attention a little bit more, because baseball is a very long season, and it can get pretty mundane through some of the summer months. And so this is a time where even me working, for the Major League Baseball Players Association, more on an HR side, I'll start to lean in a little bit more as to what's actually going on the field.
So from the standpoint of being at a player level, at a commentator level, and now as part of the MLBPA, how have your views of this time of year changed in terms of what you were aware of or not aware of? What's your view from those different positions? How has it changed or evolved over time?
Yeah, well, I'd say that as a player, you were either in the postseason hunt or you weren't. So if you weren't in it, you were looking at, hey, I got to finish strong. Don't have an eye too focused on the off season, because everybody looks forward to the off season after a long year. You've been beat up, you fail more than you succeed in this game. You get to be back with family. You get to choose your own friends, right? So it's just it can be something that in that final month or so, can be easy, especially if you're on a team that's not headed to the postseason. But you have to try to stay focused, because your performance matters, and it's still a full month of the season, 1/6 of the season. And you've got to put up numbers. You've got to leave a good last impression as well. We talk about first impressions we want to make coming out of the gates in the beginning of the season, but you want to leave a strong last impression with your manager, with your general manager, with those who are in the front office as they head into the off season and have to make business decisions and everything else. So important. I was just meeting with a player a couple of days ago, and that was one of the things we were talking about, of just staying focused, through these final, 4 or 5 weeks, because it's important. You can't just, sort of mail it in from an individual standpoint. Now, if you're in the hunt for the postseason, I think there's a couple of things. I think, there definitely can be an opportunity for increased anxiety, because no one wants to be that guy that cost the team a playoff spot or a postseason win or a series win or even a World Series. Like, so, there can be that sort of increased level of anxiety or pressure. I tended to find it more refreshing as we got into September and into October as a player that was on a team heading to the postseason, because you spend the bulk of the year, you're going, the goal that you go out every day, the goal is to win the game ultimately, but also a very close, goal right in there is to perform well and put up numbers, because this is your job and your career. And if you don't put up numbers, then you get replaced. And so what happens, and what happened in my mindset coming down the stretch towards the end of the year and into the postseason, was that I felt it kind of freeing, that I was able to focus more on the team and doing whatever it took to help us win the game. There's a lot less focus on your own individual performance, because you see the bigger picture of like, hey, this is all about us punching our ticket for October, having a chance to maybe go to the World Series, win a World Series. So it is actually kind of freeing in some ways, because you're less focused on yourself and you're focused on one another and how do we win. And so that was something that I was definitely sort of inspired by as a player. As a broadcaster, I loved the fall. It was, we in similar ways to a player, you grind all year, you're traveling, you're doing games. Sometimes you're doing just boring games. There you got a Sunday night game and it was 3.5, 4 hours, and it was just no real action. I would say that a lot of times during my broadcasting career, if I did, let's say 10 games, three to four out of those 10 games were actually good, exciting games that were as enjoyable as an announcer. So there were a lot of times, more times than not, it was a little bit of a chore in terms of how the game was being played and the outcome and the excitement of the game. But once you start to get to this time of the year, fall starts to get in the air a little bit, and get to September, and you see how things are shaking down. It really was my favorite time of the year, and also the unknowns of who's going to make it, who's not. What's this? How much does this series mean? Like, everything means so much more. Every pitch, every swing, every play. And that was fun to watch. And I guess, for me, the certainty of it all and unpredictability just kept us on the edges of our seats, because it would all determine, where am I going? Am I going to New York, or am I going to LA? Am I going to Chicago? Am I going to St. Louis? Do I have the National League? Do I have the American League in the playoffs? So it was a really great time, not just for me personally, but for my crew that I worked with, for other crews that were a part of the network, and we're all kind of start to, in some ways, come together a little bit, because the crews expand for the postseason, because we have more coverage, as opposed to during the regular year. There was only like a couple of crews, because we managed, Sunday night baseball, Saturday afternoon baseball. And that was, there wasn't a large inventory. The inventory increases. So that was always fun. And I have some of my, greatest memories. I'll share with you real quickly one of my, more infamous times, and I'll never live this down through my colleagues. Even when we get together, or we talk, if we all get together, they definitely bust my chops on the fact that we was doing a World Series, and it was, I believe it was the Dodgers and the Red Sox, and we're at Fenway Park, and it's a cold night in Boston, and man, we're freezing up there in the booth, and man, the broadcast level is jam packed. Like, every single booth is taken with media from Japan, from Canada, from you name it. So all the electricity is being surged in an older building. And so there's a heater in our broadcast booth that I decide, like, hey, I've got to plug this heater in, man, because it's cold. We got to, get this portable heater. I plug the heater in, and within 30 seconds, our broadcast goes off the air. power. We lose power in our broadcast booth, and it may have affected the booth next to us as well. We lose power. We go off the air. We're in a panic. Our producer's in a panic back there. The engineer, they had to quickly get on the phone with headquarters in Bristol. My play-by-play partner had to call the game over the cell phone so we could get the power back up to get the game back on. So from that time, I was lovingly notified by my peers and bosses, like, you're not allowed to plug anything in. So that's one thing I'll always remember about, kind of the postseason. And now for me, is working for the Major League Baseball Players Association. I'm the least amount of engaged in what's going on the field during this time of the year, as my position is more, I deal with the human side and the things that are sort of, between the ears and off the field concerns. And we start to gear up as a players association for our fall events that we have. We have a meeting in Arizona with the fall league players in October. We have our executive board meetings, which is the high point of the year, that takes place in early December. So, we start kind of gearing our minds towards that, and not as much, emphasis as you would think on kind of what's going on between the lines on the field.
So returning back to your time as a player, how often, I appreciate the approach that you had in really diving into the team and supporting the team. Were there times that you saw players who felt under so much pressure that their psychology, whether it was anxiety or feeling of overwhelm or just, getting into certain behavior patterns and slumps, that you saw them become more affected by this time of the season?
Yeah, I can't think of anyone specifically, but I could speak generally to that. And for me, the guys that I have no, data to sort of back this up, but in my experience and in my conversations, the guys that can typically have the biggest struggle are relievers, because it's really it's the least predictable job on the roster. If I'm a position player, I start a game, I'm going to get 4 at bats. I'm going to be in the field. I'm going to get comfortable. If I'm a starter, as a pitcher, hey, I'm going out, I'm starting this game. I'm going to, go through the lineup a few times unless I just have a really bad day or whatever. But when you're in the bullpen, you don't know where that game's going to go. You don't know, hey, first inning, the pitcher's going to give it up. We got to get people up and going. You don't know what's going to happen through. And so I think those guys probably have the hardest jobs of anyone, because you have to constantly be ready for anything and everything. And with that said, you're likely coming into high leverage situations where it's like, hey, we're in a jam. We got to get somebody to come in here and put this fire out. And I think relievers, in my experience, if I was just to sort of say who I feel like I've seen sort of manifest the signs of anxiety or maybe succumbing to those feelings, it would be guys coming out of the bullpen.
One thing I'm encouraged by is between the MLBPA, what baseball teams are doing, even individual players, is I know that the Kansas City Royals, they have a person in their on-field staff who's a mental health professional. I know that there was, one player who really has a strict psychological regimen that he follows. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but he really credits a lot of his consistent performance to his psychological regimen, let alone, also the things he does physically. No alcohol, God has good sleep hygiene, all those factors to try to improve his performance, to decrease some of those other secondary or tertiary issues that can become distractions off field. I know also that, there are players who have some tragedies happen throughout the season. And I guess as they're looking at those situations, I'm wondering how in those situations, the weight of their own personal life can have that effect or impact on their performance, and how do coaches and managers tend to respond to those situations?
Yeah, it usually is something that really is extreme if the manager becomes aware of it. Most of these guys deal with things privately.
Mhm.
Sometimes, unfortunately, they deal with it through alcohol or drugs. Um, but there's a whole gamut of players are human beings.
Mhm.
They're not immune to anything that the average person has to deal with. So whether it's family issues, family pressure, financially, people that when you're a ball player, you've got commas and zeros, after that initial number that everybody knows exactly. It's public information. So, you tend to be the go-to person for family. There tend to be expectations. So there's always, there's that. You can have domestic issues where, hey, guy doesn't have a healthy, good marriage. And he's coming to the ballpark after having, a near physical altercation with a spouse, and he's got to
Mhm.
gear up. I mean, we've seen the domestic, violence things that happen. So I mean, it just can go on and on. You can have grief, you lose a loved one. You're expected, you're gonna get like, leave if you need it for a few days, but there's just these things. I mean, the show must go on, right? So
Mhm.
it's not like and baseball players, I think, as well as professional athletes, pride on their resiliency and their ability to overcome and
Mhm.
get back to work, whether it's losing on a play, losing in a game, losing off the field, get back on track, and I go quickly make adjustments. And so it's not like, a regular sort of domestic job where maybe you have to take more time over grief or loss. In the
Mhm.
sport, they need you. You're important. We understand, teams, hey, we want to give you a few days, but we also are paying you a lot of money and we need you, to
Mhm.
ultimately win the game. We can't just plug another person in there and it's like, hey, we got this covered. This person can answer the emails. This person can get back to this vendor. This person can, communicate with this partner. We keep everything moving. It's like, no, there's a drop off, and many times it can be noticeable. So, there is that element there for players to quickly have to, get back to work. While they're there, and with baseball, you're playing every day, essentially every day over the course of like 6 months. I mean, you get your days off a few days a month, but you don't have a lot of downtime or free time to breathe or to seek therapy or just have a mental break. And so you mentioned the Kansas City Royals having a mental performance professional in the dugout with the team. There's several teams, probably at least half, maybe more, that have mental performance professionals that are there for the players. And I think it's great. There's still always going to be a little bit of a challenge with that. When I was playing, we had what was called the EAP, Employee Assistance Program, and we would have a person that was around. But that was just, it wasn't really promoted as, like mental health support or whatever. It was so taboo back when I was playing. But they were essentially the person, if you have some, personal issues or off the field issues, you go and talk to them. But no one wants to go and talk to that person because it's obvious if you're going to talk to them, you got issues, something's going on. And so no one wanted that stigma. And no one wanted to be perceived by their teammates or even by their team that they were having an issue. So I'm thankful that it's more, it's more common now and more open for the positive and progressive move of like mental performance, / mental health
Mhm.
within clubs. I think making it more visible and more interactive, if you will, creates less of this barrier of, oh man, I'm going down the hall and making a left to where the only office there is, the shrink.
Right.
So if I go down that hall and make a left, anybody that sees me knows, here, if you're in the dugout or if that person's on the field or they're around, you can have more casual conversations that maybe lead to deeper conversations. One of the things that I appreciated earlier this season when I was in New York and I was visiting the Yankees and the Kansas City Royals, who were playing a series there in New York, spent a lot of time with a gentleman named Chad Bowling. He is I believe he's a psychologist, a mental performance specialist. He's full-time with the Yankees. The Yankees have done a very nice job of incorporating their mental health, mental performance resources into the real culture of the club. So what I mean by that is one of the greatest things is when players park their cars in the garage to the stadium and they come walking through the tunnel and they make that, right or left into the clubhouse door, a lot of times there's long hallways. You go through the training room, you may go through the locker room. The Yankees is pretty massive, facility, but they strategically placed the mental performance professional's office as the first door when you open the door to come in, so that if you happen to pop in there or stop in there, nobody knows, no, I mean, it's going to be rare that no one, and they built a really, I think, a very safe environment the Yankees have for their players, and talking to their players, they feel very comfortable talking to their mental, performance professional. It's not the case with every team, but the Yankees, I believe, have done it better than anyone else. I haven't explored the Kansas City Royals. Maybe they do it well also, but I do know that the Yankees have made an incredible, support and environment for players to get that, regular or rare support. So, so that's been great. In seeing, what teams are doing, it's growing. Every team has to have a, professional, a psychologist that's available or accessible to the players. So that's something that didn't exist before. It just comes down to now. The reason why the Major League Baseball Players Association, and I know you'll probably talk about this, why we created a mental health program in 2024 was because we wanted to make sure that guys had access and they had privacy and they had confidentiality, because there were instances with some players in the past that the information that they shared, whether specifics or not, that information got back to the front office. And it hurt some individuals in terms of contracts and in terms of their standing with the club based upon, information that was shared about their mental performance or mental health challenges. So us becoming aware of that we're not saying that every team by any means, we think there's some great teams that do it. We also think there's the potential, like anything, for some teams to leak that information, and use it to their advantage. So we created this program so that our players would have an option to, no matter what, they'll always be a member of the Players Association. So whether they get traded from the Yankees to the Cardinals or the Cardinals to the Rays or wherever, they can still have that consistency of the PA, as opposed to like one of the players that I work with now. And one of the reasons why he connected with me is that he had a great person in his previous organization, but he got released or traded and he was in a new organization. So he doesn't have access to that previous person. So he sought out, me at the PA, and it doesn't matter who he gets traded to or released to, he can always connect with me and we can build this relationship and build a history and build off of that. So, those are some kind of tidbits about, our program and what MLB is doing, what MLBPA is doing. But at the end of the day, I believe that the spirit of it all is truly just about helping players. I've talked to some of the team psychologists and individuals, and every person that I've had a conversation with has been really excited about what the Major League Baseball Players Association is doing, because generally these are good, willing people that just want to help players at the end of the day. And they understand that sometimes players may not feel comfortable talking to them because they work for the team, but they want the player to get the help. And if they can push them towards the Players Association, they seem more than happy to do that. And that's refreshing.
Do you think that if the idea of, if there was a culture shift and still some of that stigma on mental health issues was yesterday's news, that you would really see changes in performance of teams overall because of some of those players that they're having their own issues? That, you know, we hear about what Jaron Duran, Ketel Marte, some of these, you know, players that have been more vocal about their own issues that they've been through. I know it's happened in other sports too, but overall, if people felt free to talk about these issues, got the help throughout the season, were able to feel like they had the support of their teammates rather than keep these secrets, that you would see a shift in sometimes even the standings or performance, or, you know, who was winning some of these series and World Series. And
yeah, I don't know. You know, a lot of times it's a case-by-case basis, and, you know, what an individual may be dealing with, you know, can only be heightened by, you know, their playing career. That a lot of times, you know, these issues didn't just develop when they became baseball players or Major League Baseball players. They're a lot of times had, you know, anxiety or depression in their past to some degree. And now, you know, you're just in the hot water and the tea bag of Major League Baseball, and it's going to bring out, you know, what's inside, what's going on. It's going to really stress, you know, those things you're dealing with. So, as it goes, I think that we're making progress. That sometimes people just they're hesitant to reach out. They're hesitant to follow up. They know something's not right. They know their mindset, their emotions, what they're feeling is unhealthy, but, you know, they just aren't comfortable. And so you take that, the average person who can have that. Now you take someone who's a high performer, you know, performing in front of a lot of people, how much more they can try to hide it or withdraw, because everyone's going to know, you know, I mean, or the feeling
that's why I'm talking about culture shift. And, you know, really, if we can shift the culture, if we can shift the attitudes, if we can continue to decrease that idea of stigma, to not see mental health issues as good or bad or right or wrong or strong or weak. We all have our challenges. They're all opportunities to grow. It's kind of like some of those stats that when you look at, so many kids drop out of sports by the time they're in middle school. Like 70% of kids in sports are dropping out because it's not fun anymore, because of the pressure, because of the demand and command to win. That even if we started back then and really helped to coach kids mentally as well as physically and emotionally, and then help families to understand that, you know, that's years in the making. But even now, if we can continue that shift in the culture, and you're a part of that shift to me in what you're doing with the Players Association, and I know how much you care about individual people and it's not just about how they're performing on the field, it's how they're performing between here. And that's something that I hope that change and shift in culture can continue. Because if I just take that fact about how many people drop out of sport, how many kids are dropping out of sports because it's not fun, and then we take that idea of all the pressures that people might be experiencing if they have to cap when they get on the field, and they're not necessarily people who have diagnosable anxiety or depression, or, you know, they're having struggles with their kids in school, and if they just were able to talk about that, not necessarily with players, but it was known that, hey, we all have our stuff, and we don't have to hide it behind looking strong and stoic and brave and taking one every day for the team. That's, I guess, where I'm wondering, do you think that there would be a lot healthier players out there, even the stress that those things psychologically add also add to physical stress. So I think we're potentially impacting injury rates and decreasing injury rates potentially. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of layers to that. There are a lot of factors that, and I know that, through the library of podcasts that you've created, you touch on some of these different aspects of society, and social media is one of them. You know, for baseball, showcase tournaments, all these things, these kids. I don't think the issue and the stress that these kids feel is necessarily from winning. I think we've gotten away from winning. I think what we've focused on is individual performance. And that heightens, I think, the pressure and the stress for
Mhm.
these kids, because everything is a showcase tournament. How far did I hit the ball? What was my exit velocity? How hard did I throw my pitch? Not how many guys did I strike out and how many games did we win? What was my velocity? How many hits did I have? And that's getting posted on Perfect Game, social media. It's going across
Mhm.
the world. And kids are comparing themselves to others. Nobody's really talking about, hey, this team came in and won, these
Right.
tournaments, and they did this. They're talking about individual performances. They're highlighting individuals, and the focus is so much there that it increases the stress. Now you have to train more. You're spending more time training with a batting coach, lifting weights, doing all these things just so that you can keep up. And I think that leads to burnout, where these kids are
Mhm.
like, hey, I got to do all of this stuff. I can't just go play in the fall and then
Right.
relax in the winter and maybe play something else in the spring and then take the summer off and then come back in the fall. These other kids are playing all year round. So if I don't continue to invest, I'm going to look like a fool or way behind in terms of performance. So those are factors that are contributing as well. And
Mhm.
I just think that it's unhealthy. On one end, we're making progress, we're making more awareness for mental health, we're trying to remove the stigmas, we're trying to make it more of a conversation, a normal daily conversation on one end. But then society, and whether you want to say it's greed or what we're pursuing, it's almost like we're trying to put the fire out on one end, but we're pouring gasoline on the other side
Right.
and
Right.
stoking it. And it's definitely a challenge, but we can't lose heart. We have to just continue to deal with players where they are. Hopefully there are agents of change that are seeing what's going on in youth sports and
Mhm.
are trying to reshape that. I'm aware of at least one group that's trying to do that. It's a major undertaking, but at least there are people that see it and are trying to shift things.
Mhm. Mhm. Good. Good. Yeah, that's encouraging to hear. But great points about all the pressure these kids are under individually now.
Yeah.
That's again a great stressor. So um, one last question is, we there's been talk through the season about what the Colorado Rockies have been going through in terms of their performance, and I think having the longest series losing streak in MLB history. How would you think that a team that's been through that experience at the end of the season, what is the approach? Do you think that they just need to kind of, does the manager need to go? Does I mean what happens with the team psychology and all of those pieces that go into it? I mean, I don't even know where to start with a question like that in ways, but
Well, the Rockies did fire their manager earlier this season, and gentleman named Bud Black, former left-handed pitcher in the big leagues, great career, great manager, great person. Um, had success there in Colorado. Had some success in San Diego as well. Longtime manager, a real pro. I don't believe it was his fault. I mean, it was he was given. They knew in the off season coming into the year the Rockies were going to lose 100 games or more because of their roster. They just didn't. They were not investing in the team. They sometimes have a hard time getting players there, especially pitchers, because pitchers don't want to pitch in that altitude. Free agent pitchers don't want to go to Colorado, or because it's like your numbers are going to go up, your ERA is going to be higher, all of that because of the altitude and the way the ball travels. So we knew coming into the year that the Rockies were going to have a horrific year, and so what happens? A lot of times your manager gets fired. Not his fault. You give me, this is what you give me to work with, so anyhow, that's already happened there. There's a lot more they can go into, whether it's owners investing in the team, spending money, not willing to spend. But I think for the players, there's a couple different angles. If you're a young player and you're getting an opportunity, you got to go out there and show that you're a big leaguer. So you got to go out there, establish your routine, become consistent in that. You hope that produces good results on the field, and that you can prove, regardless of how poor your team's record is, that, hey, you're a major league caliber player. Because you're always, I tell guys, you got to remember, when you go out and play, you're not playing for just your team. You're playing for all 30 teams in the league, because everyone's watching, everyone's scouting. They're always looking for a player they might want to trade for. They might want to sign as a free agent. So you have to remember that you're playing for the entire league, and you are, the asset, and you are the stock, if you will, and you want to raise your stock value as high as possible. So there's that element for players, that, you want to go out and you want to perform. I was on a team in Baltimore in 2002. We're in a tough division in the National League East. We had the Yankees, the Red Sox. We knew we were young. We were going to struggle. We were going to lose a lot of games. It's not easy. It's not easy to be in a situation like that, because knowing that the odds are against you, there can be a real, sort of easy ability to just go through the motions. Now, on the flip side, if you're the Colorado Rockies, I don't know what their minor league system and where they're headed. I don't believe that they really have a 3 or 5 year plan. But if you're in a situation where you understand, hey, we're building and we're stockpiling our minor leagues and we're preparing, we're going to take our lumps over the next couple of years, but we have a plan to be somewhere in 3 to 5 years, then typically that mindset comes from the top down, from the front office through the coaches, and then ultimately into the players, of we have to adjust what our expectations are in terms of wins and losses. And we're looking at development. How are we getting better? Even if it doesn't mean wins right now, how are we playing the game and getting better? Because we're positioning ourselves to win in a couple of years. So, there's a lot of different things there. The month of September for players that are, on a team like the Rockies, for some guys, if their contract is secure, they're like, man, I can't wait till this thing's over. I'm tired of losing every day. But if you're a younger guy, you're like, hey, this is my opportunity. You might get called up in September as the rosters expand. I don't care. I'm in the big leagues. This is my opportunity to go out there and play and try to put up some numbers and increase my stock, so that whether it's here or somewhere else, somebody wants me to wear a big league uniform. So yeah, it's hard, especially coming into the year when we're going to lose a lot this year. And being one of those individuals where, how do I stay positive every day? How do I bring good energy to the ballpark? How do we readjust, what our goals are? And, how do we measure success, in a situation where we know that we're not going to have a high degree of success in terms of wins.
Okay. Yeah. Great information. So, well, I appreciate you being here today and talking about some ball and some of the psychology of it. Always appreciate what you're doing for your fellow players and for the world at large. So again, always fun to have you on the show and talking about these issues and how they relate to helping us between here and not just there on the field. So
yeah, man.
So thanks again for your time, Chris. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So appreciate Chris always being on the show and you being a part of it. And we'll be having Andrew back one of these days soon. So hope he's enjoyed the time with his family. But until next time,